podcast where we put you on the map. This is Ron Costa broadcasting live from the Mappable USA studios in Las Vegas, Nevada. And folks, today a lot of people are doing private placements, but maybe Reg.A might be a little bit better for them. We're gonna talk about that today, amongst a whole lot of other things. So before we do that, let's introduce our guest today. He's been a guest a number of times. We all love him. As the show is always great when we have Mike Brette on. So Mike, how you doing over there today?
I'm doing well. Thanks a lot, Ron.
Yeah, it's great to have you back on the show again. This is starting to be a consistent thing, and I'm liking it. So it's all good, right?
Yeah, me too. I appreciate it.
Yeah, that's great. And Mike, again, I'm sure people know who you are, but if they don't know, why don't you give us a little bit of quick background on yourself and all about small cap equity advisors and what you do out there?
Yeah, Small Cap Equity Advisors is a top consulting advisory firm, and we assist companies in preparing and filing the Reg.A offerings, S1 registrations, or reverse merger. I've been on the show before, and I talked about, there's only two ways of legally raising money, a full-blown S1 registration or filing an exemption like Reg.A. So we focus on that to help companies stay compliant with state and federal security laws. And again, if they want to go public and access the public markets, we can do that with a Reg.A, S1, or with a reverse merger, into a trading company. And we've been doing it for over 30 years.
Yeah, exactly. And you mentioned only two ways to do it legally. I think you got to drive that point home, because it seems to me there's a lot of people out there that think there are 17 ways to do it or something, It's crazy out there.
Yeah, again, people just don't, they try to use a business plan or a deck or some concoctions of promissory notes or debentures, and they're out there cold calling people and violating every state and federal security law out there because they don't think it applies to them, especially in the crypto markets, which have taken a big hit recently. Always, but recently there's been some things in the news about it, and especially with promoters promoting a token or something and not disclosing that they're being compensated. So I get calls all the time from people and say, look, if you're going to do a security offering, you got to do a registration or file under an exemption. But they still, I get these people with want to do tokens. Well, a token is not a security. Okay, yeah, right. All right, keep telling yourself that.
Yeah. Yeah, the SEC would like to have a word with you, right?
Yeah, right. And anytime, it's a red flag. Anytime you do a filing and you put in there that you're going to be doing a crypto or a token or something like that, you're right. It's a red flag with the SEC, and they're going to take a long, hard look at who's involved and what you're doing and how you're going to do it. So, but anyhow, our job here at Small Cap Equity Advisor is to, consult with clients, advise them the right way of doing it, and then help them do it so they stay out of trouble. And, that's our function.
Right. And now, getting into the whole meat of this whole conversation, before the Jobs Act, everybody was doing private placements and they were doing their own little thing like that. Then the Jobs Act came around, and Regulation A, all these other different ways to crowdfund or Reg CF, et cetera. Now, are people still doing private placements, or why should they do that versus, let's say, going straight Regulation A?
That's a good question. And I think the main reason is they don't fully understand the flexibility of a Reg.A over, typical Reg D private placement. They don't really understand the flexibility and what's involved with a Reg.A. And somebody talks them into it, whether it's a friend of a friend or, a securities lawyer who really doesn't understand Reg.A. And, he focuses on Reg D as being cheaper, better, faster, and it's not. It's not cheaper, it's not better, it's not faster. You still have disclosure requirements. So, I get calls weekly from people that, really don't understand the flexibility, with the Reg.A. And that's kind of what I think maybe the topic of our show today is going to be is, the flexibility, why Reg A should be looked at.
Exactly. Yeah. So let's kind of get into that, because I know there's a lot of different options that you can go, and different companies have different goals. So what do you think about that? What's the biggest thing about that they should be concerned about?
Well, what they should look at is, number one, a Reg A and a Reg D are both exemptions from registration. So they're still a filing with the SEC, but they're an exemption from registration. So now, the flexibility with a Reg A is, once you file with the SEC and the SEC qualifies the offering, there's no approval process. It's just, once you file, if there's no questions or further comments from the SEC, they send you a letter and say, you're qualified, you're good to go, start raising money. With a Reg D, you have to file, depending on what code section you do under Reg D, you either have to file the Form D with the SEC 15 days after you get your first check, or 15 days before you get your first check. Again, depending on which one you file under. Now, having said that, a Reg A is flexible because the stock that you issue to investors is free trading. There's no Rule 144 restriction against resale of the stock by the investor. Now, when investors put money into a private placement under Reg D, it's restricted for 12 months or longer, depending on when the company decides to do a registration, which is more expense and more time. So they've got to register the shares so that the investor, at some point in time, if they want to sell them to a friend or dispose of them or get a loan against them or whatever, it has to be freed up. So again, the flexibility of the Reg A is it's automatic. Once you get qualified, your offering is qualified by the SEC, and you issue stock to an investor. If that investor runs into a financial hardship 6 months down the line and they need to sell them to somebody, they can. They don't have to come back to the company and demand their money back or make some kind of an excuse. If there's a big secondary market for Reg A shares with a lot of different alternative trading systems out there that you can list your shares if you don't know anybody, and you can trade them, even if it's not a public offering. With Reg D, you can't do that. And with the Reg A, go ahead.
I was going to interject there. So these secondary markets exist today? They're out there right now? Or do you have to find your own seller?
No, you can find your own seller. You can, if you want to sell them to your brother-in-law or a business associate who knows about the deal and says, man, I wish I could have gotten in on that before the Reg A closed out, you can say, well, I'll sell you my shares. Now, if you don't know anybody, you can list on the secondary markets. There's Upstream, that's one, Upstream Exchange. There's a multitude of different secondary exchanges out there that you can list your offering on. Now, whether you can sell it on that exchange is really going to depend on the strength of the company, and the value of the shares. So let me give you an example. Let's say you paid $1 for the Reg A shares, and the company really performed well, and now the stock is, the valuation has increased to where the stock is worth $5 a share. Well, you can sell it because you can justify that, the $5 price, so you can go on the secondary market and resell them to an investor and make a nice profit.
Right. The interesting thing about this, though, that seems kind of counterintuitive to the Reg A to begin with. Reg A, one of the things that everyone says is great about is that if you're an issuer, you could be your customers can become your investors, right? That's your base there. They like the product.
Yeah.
And a lot of these customers who like your company, like you, like the deal and everything, they're not really in there to make a quick buck, right? They're in there for the long term, for the most part, on their when they buy these shares. So an investor that comes in, let's say, buys something at $1, all of a sudden it shoots up to $2. Let's say their likelihood of selling is still pretty low because they like the company, right? Isn't that what we've seen so far?
Yeah, most people will invest for the long haul. But at least, the Reg A gives the investor that flexibility that, if they put in $100,000 into the Reg A, if they want to, at some point in time, if they say, I really need some cash, they can, again, they can turn around and sell them. Again, if they go into a Reg D, they're stuck. And we call that in the business dead money. So even if you really like the company, a Reg A gives you that flexibility that if you should happen to need the money at some point in time, you can, again, there's a market to resell it under Reg A, which is not available under Reg D. But yeah, you're right. Most investors out there will come into a company because they like the future that the company holds, which might take 2, 3, 4, 5 years to come into being. And so they're buying in for the long haul. But again, I answer your question from the top of the show, why would people want to do a Reg D as opposed to a Reg A in this market comes down to they really don't understand the nuances and the flexibility of a Reg A. And there's a lot more. Another element to both of those deals, under a Reg A, you can take investment capital from accredited and non-accredited investors, and there's no requirement that you have to verify the accreditation status of the investor. Under Reg D, you have to. In other words, it used to be in the old days, you could have the investors under a Reg D, you could have them sign as an investor suitability questionnaire and attesting to the fact, check the box and say I'm accredited. You can't do that under Reg D 506C. You have to take what the SEC calls reasonable steps to verify, third-party verification. You have to get bank statements, tax returns, brokerage statements, a letter from their attorney, a letter from their accountant, attesting to the fact that they are accredited. So you've got that extra hoop, those extra hoops to jump through if you do a Reg D, but the flexibility under Reg A, you don't have to do that.
Yeah, that's big. That's really nice.
Yeah, and that can be expensive too. Now there are services out there, such as broker dealers, that will take on that responsibility of verifying, but they charge for it. And then there's some other independent companies out there that do it. They charge $1,000 to $2,000 per investor to verify, they're accredited. So I mean, again, there's additional expense, additional delays before you can take the money. Under Reg A, once you're qualified with the SEC, I mean, you're good to go. There's no holdbacks.
Yeah, an interesting industry term is KYC AML. We hear that all the time. Is that synonymous with the accredited investor verification?
Yeah, yet the KYC is know your customer, and the AML is the anti-money laundering, which you have to, under the private placements, you've got to do those extra steps, and the broker dealer generally will take care of that if you're going to. And again, a lot of people do these Reg Ds and they don't have a PPM, a private placement memoranda. They fail to file the Form D with the SEC as required. And so by not doing those extra steps, you're violating state and federal security laws, and your Reg D exemption goes out the window. So you don't have the protection of the exemption by not taking those extra steps.
Yeah, that's when you got to hire your second lawyer, right?
Yeah. Now under Reg D, to full disclosure, under Reg D, the question of whether you need a PPM or not is up for debate sometimes. Some lawyers will say, well, you don't need it. And I always tell clients, look, you should always have a PPM. If you're dealing with accredited investors only under your Reg D, you don't need the PPM. However, if a non-accredited investor should sneak in somehow, or you make the mistake of taking money from a non-accredited investor under Reg D, and you haven't given them a PPM, which is a disclosure document that talks about all the risk involved and the fact that the investor could lose his money. If you haven't done that with a non-accredited, you got a problem. So I always tell clients, look, the disclosure document, the PPM, will protect you and protect the investor. So spend the $25,000 to get the PPM put together so you can sleep at night, And now with the Reg A, you automatically have the prospectus when you file Form 1A with the SEC. That's the prospectus disclosure document that all investors get to see.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, I agree with you in that I'm always one to be on the safe side of things. If you don't want to spend $25,000 to do a PPM, and you're doing Regulation D, you shouldn't be doing it in the first place. I mean, that's
exactly.
These people don't have enough money to go. Some people shouldn't be looking at this. It's crowdfunding and Reg A, Reg D isn't for everybody. And you've hit on a couple of really interesting points that I really think that you're making the case for Reg A. But what's really interesting to me for Reg A is, isn't there some way that founders or whatever get a certain amount of their stock for cash with Reg A?
Yeah, absolutely. That's another selling point for Reg A. Founders and insiders and affiliates can register and sell up to 30% of their stock in the Reg A, so they could get some cash. So again, if the founders have put in some money early on to help get it started, and they want to get liquid, they can. They can register some of their shares into the Reg A, sell them in the open market, the secondary market, or if they take the company public, they can sell the shares that way. Now, under Reg D, you can't do that. So, again, the flexibility of the Reg A, I think, should be on everybody's mind, and they should at least look into it if they're out there trying to raise money.
And when these founders can sell 30%, they could do that on day one as well? They don't have to, there's no waiting period for them?
Right.
Wow.
No waiting period. Yeah.
Is that good? Is that good or bad from an investor perspective when you get into a deal and you see your founder selling 30% of their stock? Is that a
that's a good point. Yeah, that's a good point. It's not a red flag, but it doesn't. I tell people it doesn't look that good to investors if they see the founder, registering some stock. But it depends on how much stock the founder has. I mean, if the founder has, 50 million shares of stock and he's registering 5 million shares to sell, it doesn't look that bad. But if he's registering a bigger chunk than that, it looks bad. It looks to investors like, wait a minute, if this founder really believed in this deal, he'd be hanging on long term, to his investment. So it cuts both ways, but at least it's an option that the founders have.
Okay, cool. All right. Well, I guess the next point then, what's the broker-dealer's role in a Reg A versus a Reg D, or is there any differences?
Yeah, there is. With a Reg A and also with a Reg D, there are certain states that require the sale of securities to be done by a FINRA registered broker-dealer. And Texas and Florida are two states. There's a total of about 12 states that the issuer cannot sell and raise money, can't sell stock and raise money themselves. It has to go through a licensed broker-dealer. So now, and in fact, I had 2 phone calls today from companies in Florida that want to do an offering, and I had to cover that with them also. I said, look, if you're raising money in Florida, we're going to have to do the offering, the Reg A, get it qualified, but also retain the services of a broker-dealer, because only a broker-dealer can sell the stock. So it's always good, whether you're doing a Reg D or a Reg A, it's always good to have a lead investment bank or broker-dealer to do all the compliance issues that are involved with raising capital. And there are a lot of issues that a broker-dealer needs to handle.
Right, and there are tons of broker-dealers out there. What's the criteria that an issuer should look at in terms of choosing one broker-dealer over the other?
Yeah, good point. Some of them will, I don't want to mention names, but some of them don't raise any. Yeah, some of them don't raise any money at all. All they do is the backroom compliance to make sure the KYC and the AML are satisfied, that the investors have been verified if you're doing a Reg D, and they'll be the broker dealer of record for like Florida and Texas and the other states that require the sale of the securities, but they don't actually market the deals, whether it's a Reg D or Reg.A. They don't go out and get the money for you. They just do the compliance. So, but there are other broker dealers that actually take you on as a client if you qualify, and will also start soliciting money for you to, fund your deal. So you really need to look at the broker dealer's track record, what they do, what they don't do before you sign on with them. If you think you can raise the money yourself, and that's another point we'll cover, but if you think you can raise the money, then you go with a different broker dealer who will charge substantially less on a retainer and other fees than a broker dealer that actually raises money.
Yeah, that's a great point too, because, a lot of people do think they could do it themselves, and then they get a rude awakening, right? It's hard to raise money for the deals.
People, especially under crowdfunding with the regulation CF, still don't understand that element of raising money. With the regulation crowdfunding CF, you still have to file Form C with the SEC. That's a prospectus. That's usually about $18,000 or so to get that filed. And depending how much money you're going to raise, you have to have audited statements or at least reviewed statements from an outside CPA. And you still have to upload that offering to an SEC-approved funding platform to raise the money.
Oh,
you can't raise the money through your own website. It has to go through that funding portal. So again, I field phone calls like this all the time. People just don't understand what the crowdfunding is all about, the rules and regulations, and what they can advertise and what they can't advertise. So it's a minefield if you try to do it on your own.
Yeah, Mike, one of the most biggest misconceptions I see all the time from people who are doing this, they think that if they put their offering on a investment portal or a crowdfunding portal or whatever, that they're automatically going to make the money because it's on a portal. Like the portal is going to market their deal for them, and that is not the case. So
no, they can't. It's illegal. The SEC and FINRA do not allow the funding portals to advertise and promote one deal over another. Now, they can put out a press release or a social media blurb that says these 10 companies have signed up to use our platform for crowdfunding. They can do that, but they can't do a full-blown marketing and promotional campaign for one company over the other. Now, their sales pitch usually is, we have 100,000 investors signed up on our website. Well, they don't. What they have is They have 100,000 people that signed up on the website to look at deals, not just your deal. So, yeah, that's a reality that people have to understand. No matter what they're using to raise money, Reg D, Reg.A, crowdfunding, it all comes down to your responsibility as the issuer to have a marketing budget to reach out to investors to make them aware that you have an offering. Otherwise, how are they going to know you have a Reg.A or a Reg D or whatever if you don't reach out?
Exactly.
99.9% of people trying to raise money don't have a network beyond their parents and brothers and sisters, friends and families. So they have to have a budget, and most of them don't.
And most of those people turn their friends and families into enemies right after the deal goes bad.
It gets really awkward around Christmas and Thanksgiving.
It sure does. Yes. Well, getting back to this broker deal thing, does every deal have to have a broker dealer involved then?
The short answer is yes. You should always have a broker dealer, because how else would you if you're doing a Reg D, how else would you qualify and verify that it's accredited investor coming into your deal? You, as the issuer, really can't take on that responsibility and try to get bank statements and tax returns and go through all those things, because most of these companies are so desperate to raise money they won't take that extra step. But a broker-dealer putting their license on the line will make sure that those steps are taken. And with a Reg.A, you really need to have a broker-dealer right from the get-go involved with your offering, rather than try to add one, later on down the line. So the short answer, yes, you should always have a affiliation with a broker-dealer, a licensed broker-dealer. Now, having said that, I know other people out there don't. They file the Form D, they get with their securities lawyer, they do the PPM, and they start talking to friends and families and people they meet on the golf course or conferences, and they try to raise the money themselves, which you can. But if you slip up and try to raise money in Texas and Florida and other states that require a broker-dealer, you lose your exemption from registration, and now you got a real problem. So
right.
You shouldn't try to do it on your own.
Okay, and then what's the role of the transfer agent in this whole process?
Yeah, the transfer agent is an essential element because they're the ones that will issue stock to investors, so the company doesn't have to keep a record of the issuance of shares. And the transfer agents are closely regulated and monitored by the SEC. They can spot check transfer agents anytime and go in and make sure their records are up to date. So a transfer agent takes on the responsibility of keeping a list of shareholders, what their holdings happen to be, how they paid for them, and things of that nature. So that's what the transfer agent is all about.
Okay. All right. Cool. So we've gone through this whole process. Let's finish off this podcast on probably one of the most important things, other than the liquidity aspect of all this, which is long-term thinking of maybe a company wants to go public. They want to list on the stock exchange somehow. Mm-hmm. How does that hold different between Reg.A and maybe a private placement? What are the concerns there?
Yeah, good question. And that comes down to flexibility of a Reg.A over a Reg D. If you do a Reg.A and you get it qualified by the SEC and you're raising money and you're going along, then you think, well, I think I want to be a public company. You can list that Reg.A without any further paperwork, except for filing with the exchange. You can list it to go public. With a Reg D, you can't. With a Reg D, you have to, once you do all the legal work and you've done everything and you've paid out $25,000 to $50,000 in legal and accounting to do a private placement, and now you say, I want to go public, you got to start all over again. More legal fees, more auditing, more accounting. Then you've got the exchange fees. So,
yep.
I just tell people, look, if your plan now is to go public, do a Reg.A. If your plan in 18 months to 24 months is to go public, do a Reg.A now and forget about, later on.
And of course, on that situation too, you do want to go Regulation A Tier 2, right? Because the Tier 1 isn't as promising that way, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. There's two tiers with Reg.A. Tier 1, you can raise up to $25 million, and you don't need audited financial statements. However, if you do the Tier 1, you're going to have to blue sky the offering and pay blue sky fees in every state where you're going to raise money. With a Tier 2, you can raise up to $75 million, and you have blue sky exemption. You don't have to register your offering in all those states. Now, having said that, you still have to file in certain states what they call a notice filing, which really comes down to you pay a couple of $100 to a state, and you just notify them on a form that says, we're doing a Reg.A in your state, here's the $200 filing fee. So it's a notice filing. No hoops to jump through, no reviews or anything like that. And more importantly, and you have to have audited statements to do a Tier 2. But that's really important. The audited statements really give you credibility with a lot of retail investors and especially institutional investors. The compliance department of the institutional investors will not allow their brokers to represent a deal that doesn't have current audited financials. So you don't get the respect in the marketplace. You don't get the support. And obviously you can't take the company public without audited financials, again, because you don't receive the support that you would. So I caution people, look, if you don't have the money to pay for the audits for a tier 2, we can consider the tier 1 until you raise some money, and then, amend it with some audited financial statements and go for a tier 2.
Got it. Okay, excellent. All right, well, one more question, Mike, that a lot of people are asking me, and I'm sure they're soon doing the same thing to you, is when these issuers come to you and they say, we want to do crowdfunding, or we want to go public, or we want to do this, but we don't want to lose control of our company. What do you say to them in that situation when people are buying shares, or there's voting rights, or that's a concern for a lot of these guys.
Yeah, it is, and you have to get that structured in your articles of incorporation right from the get-go. When you incorporate as a C corporation, that you're going to issue different classes of stock, A stock, B stock, C stock, where, you as the founders and the owners, no matter how much stock you sell to the public and to investors, if you keep the voting super preferred shares, then you control the company. Even if you own 10% of the company, as long as you have the voting rights, you control the company. So, but a lot of people aren't aware of that. Wall Street doesn't like it necessarily that, you do different classes, but Mark Zuckerberg did it with Facebook. He doesn't own a big chunk of Facebook anymore, but he controls the voting. Google did it. Google issued A shares, B shares, C, and D so they could get more shares out into the public and in institutions and retail investors so they could raise more money. But they also control the voting shares. Ford Motor Company did that 100 years ago. I mean, the Ford Motor Company family owns less than 8% of the stock, but they control the voting stock of Ford.
Right.
So, its structure is really important.
Well, I'll tell you what, it sounds like from the contents of this podcast that the flexibility of the Reg.A really is superior to like a private placement, I guess in general, right? I mean, you'd agree with that, right, Mike?
Yeah. I mean, there's pros and cons to each one of them. As far as legal costs, it's about the same. As far as accounting, the accounting can, audits, the accounting work can take anywhere from $15,000 on up, depending on the shape of the books and what has to be audited. But, each one has some pros and cons, and I think everybody should take a look at with their counsel and advisors which would be better for them in the short term and the long term.
Yeah, and who's a better advisor than Mike Brette, right? So, Mike, how do people get a hold of you?
Good. Yeah, they can go to LinkedIn, and my contact information is there. They can email me at MikeBrette, BRETTE @gmail.com. Call me 951-236-8473. And I'm available.
I think the contents of this podcast should be made public to every college campus out there because they don't teach this kind of stuff, do they?
Yeah, good point.
Oh man, that's why you got to have podcasts. So, Mike, listen, thanks again for being a guest on the show. You're always so enlightening and so informative to the audience. Really appreciate you having the time to come on and talk to us today. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity too. I'll talk to you next time.
You got it. And folks, you're listening to the Mappable USA podcast at mappableusa.com. If you go to that website, scroll down the homepage, you'll see all our syndication sources. You should pick the one you like best, subscribe, and you'll never miss another one of our shows. And if you want to be a guest on the show like Mike was today, fill out the form there. We'll see what we do about getting you on the show. And if you like what you heard today, send us an email at info@mappableusa.com or just leave a comment on whatever page you're listening to this on right now. So thanks for listening. Thanks for your support. We'll be at you next time with another Mappable USA podcast. Have a great week, everyone.